Thank you, sir. Thank you once again. I speak on resurgence of Taliban, and as you can see, the topic itself is extremely confusing and contradicting, because resurgence, as I understand, was in Afghanistan, and what happened in Pakistan was actually emergence. How it happened, I will just tell you. Confusion between Afghan Taliban and Pakistan Taliban, which I also think could be deliberate to keep attention off, and this deliberate part is from Pakistan's side. And then the issue of good Taliban versus bad Taliban, which is again tactical if not strategic. This resurgence of Taliban took place in Afghanistan. Now, there is confusion about where exactly or when exactly we can date or pin a date on the resurgence in Afghanistan. According to Amin Tarzi, it is December 2001 when people had already started discussing on future of Taliban. In December 2002, a report which Amin Tarzi himself cites, he says that Al-Qaeda had started regrouping in December 2002. And in 2003, there were reports of intermittent attack against foreign aid workers. Barfield says that actually, unmistakably, if you want to use the word resurgence, it should be mid-2006. By 2005-6, suicide bombings had started rising, but he fixes the date at 2006. And the number of IED explosions had doubled, and armed attacks tripled by this time. In Pakistan, the emergence took place in FATA. I will just come to the region FATA when I discuss the landscape, but I just very briefly mention these are the federally administered territories, and these are actually 7. To begin with, there were 5, 2 were added later when the country started. This is the data, but I can also tell you there's a counter data. There are 25 different kind of statistics available on what is the level of literacy, what is the level of economic. But let me tell you, it is very poor. I mean, none of them show a very good picture of it, but there are varied, figures given for FATA. What are the factors responsible for the emergence of Taliban? The first and major factor, which everyone agrees, were the initial mistakes which the United States made after bombing, and when Taliban started fleeing, they left. They left to start another war called Iraq War. Now, this Iraq War had 2 objectives. One, they thought that that having finished their objective, reached their objective in Afghanistan, or to have projected as having brought about the fall of Taliban, they wanted to take the attention to Iraq War for a domestic audience also, because the target of victory was Osama bin Laden, which was nowhere in sight. So they thought if another war they have a target they had captured, they could be victorious at home. This was a singular big mistake of United States, singular big factor in the emergence of Taliban, which started because this was the time the Taliban started regrouping. Now, this is not the old Taliban. The term which is used, I will just show you, Neo-Taliban, because there were very many other people also which had now joined this grouping. For Afghanistan, it was a global war on terror. The objectives were to see the ouster of Taliban, and so what they did was, as the Taliban was fleeing, they did nothing to check their flow into Pakistan. As a result, for them, the limited objective of global war on terror it was not their war, it was an American war, which led to their firm entrenchment in. There are people who say there were reasons for what happened in Tora Bora at this point of time, on which I'll come a little later. Then we have a factor called Punjabi Taliban, which started moving, and whose emergence we trace from 2002 in South Punjab, which is as bad. Now, Farhad Taj, has made some very different understanding, or has shown a different picture of the Taliban movement. And in one of the projections, she says that it was the Punjabi Taliban which got entrenched in the society of tribal areas, and not the terrorists and militants. She says in her field study, her understanding is that the tribals or who were living there could very well distinguish between the terrorists and the non-terrorists. So she says that what is actually being identified as Punjabi Taliban were the Punjabis which were already living there and were later galvanized into action, as the Pakistani state started haunting them for throwing out the foreigners. A slow progress. The other factors are marginalization of certain groups, slow progress in reconstruction and development. There's a very good analysis by the New American Foundation where they have done an ethnic-based analysis of the Afghan National Army, why the Pashtuns thought they were left out in the reconstruction and rebuilding. Their expectations were far below what was promised. Some of the studies say far below the aid promised came to Afghanistan, and therefore, a general disillusionment amongst the Pashtuns started. But I want to very clearly say I belong to the school of thought which says all Pashtuns are not Taliban, not even supporters of Taliban. The atrocities committed by US and NATO forces, ineptitude and inefficiency of Afghan security, lack of governance in Pakistan generally, in tribal areas particularly. Barfield says that it was the frustration against expected gains. Peter Burgeon identifies that this was the compliant Pakistani government, hefty cash inflows from the drug trade, which also varied in case of Afghan and Pakistan Taliban. I'll just come to it. What was the nature of this new Taliban? The term which many people like to use is Neo Taliban. Salim Shahzad belongs to that group also, belonged to that group. He said, a new generation of Pakistan, Afghan, Al-Qaeda and Kashmiri fighters who had adopted Al-Qaeda ideology, who planned new tactics, whose efforts were complemented traditional guerrilla warfare of the Kandahari clan. This was in southwest Afghanistan, where you saw this Neo Taliban. And this is what AFPAC region which they identify, although did not call it by that name. Barfield also said that this was, in fact, he uses a very nice word. He says, only those mujahideen whose beard had gone grey by this time, it was actually conducted by them, into which others had joined. Many non-Pashtun regions did not join this Neo-Taliban. This is a general perception of Afghan Taliban versus Pakistan Taliban versus Afghan, the differences between the two. The leaders of the two Taliban, they share common interests, anti-Americanism, first of all, which binds them together. And then, Afghan Taliban, these are the semantic discussions. As I went on studying further, I'm increasingly convinced that there is frankly no major difference between the two, so long as the, Pakistani state tries to cultivate Pakistan Taliban, or TTP as they call it, only that factor remains. Once the US are out of Afghanistan or reduce their presence, I think they will merge. And one thing we must not forget, apart from America, apart from Shariat, their ideas on India are same. Now, this is what they seek to regain the power they had over most of the Afghanistan, this Afghan Taliban, using Pakistan as the area. Now, before 9/11, the Afghan Taliban hosted Osama and the other leaders of Al-Qaeda, but the groups are now separated geographically, and their leaders. There are some instances, for instance, Mullah Omar asking people in the tribal areas not to attack Pakistan, but these are far and few, Taliban, Pakistan Taliban is a far looser coalition, much later in emergence as a force. In fact, those groups existed, but as a group together, Metullah Masood announced their emergence in 2007. These are three different phases in which the Taliban grew. From 2001 to 2004, when Al-Qaeda escaped, from 2004 to 2007, when Talibanization started spreading into the south districts, and 2007 to 11, when TTP emerged. Now, this is what David Petraeus had to say about TTP soon after its emergence, that this is the threat to very existence of Pakistan. These are the groups which form, which I call Neo-Taliban. These are the people who join and how it differs from the old Taliban. The Afghan orphans, the warlords, drug lords, unemployed Afghans, Pakistan and Afghan radicals funded by Al-Qaeda, and Afghan refugees. This is the militancy landscape of, I had actually a big table, I'll quick skip through it, highlighting the main points. Now, South Waziristan is the largest agency of the FATA region, and basically it has Mahsoods versus Wazirs. This is the main region where the fighting has been going on, and it has a population roughly 450,000 people. Now, this is the region where you had strong links of Haqqanis. It is in focus recently because of the US pressure on the Haqqani group. This is also where you had, you saw the Hakimullah was killed in 2010. Military action took place in 2009 when TTP leaders, whoever they were, fled. North Waziristan is where you have Usmani Wazirs and also the what you call the other groups are the Dawars. And the fighting is actually the influence over TTP Their intertribal rivalry also, and this is the time when Nazir helped Hakimullah to rise. There's been no military action in the region. The most important town in the region is Mir Ali, which is constantly there. Arab fighters are there, and Shawal Valley is used for their operations there. It is a safe haven since 2004, especially when Pakistani police forces started acting. Now we have Khurram, which is actually a Shia, 40% Shia. There are no safe havens for foreigners here. The conflict here is essentially sectarian in nature, and Hakimullah Masood, designated commander in Khurram, and Fakir Alam Masood personally beheaded 70 Shias. That is the issue which was. Now, the other is Orakzai. The Orakzai agencies is that speciality about it doesn't share border with Afghanistan. So you see it entrenched when you see the areas separately. But there is no frontier constabulary presence is a distinguishing feature of this agency, and militants from South Waziristan have some operations there. It has 10% Shias. Khyber agency is where you have Lashkar-e-Islam, Mangal Bags, who just doesn't listen to anyone, and it was Haji Namdas 2003, this organization, which is actually Invitation to Virtue and Vice, and Radio Taliban, which became famous, which is why, infamous I should say, which is why this agency is known for. Bajor is an important safe haven for Al-Qaeda. It is next to Kunar province of Pakistan. It was here that attack on Zawahiri took place, and he left a few minutes before the attack took place. Mohammed, the last agency, which is a recruiting ground for the Tehreek-e-Nifaz-e-Shahriyat Muhammadi here, and here also you have split groups. Military had very poor showings in this region. Actually, if you talk about FATA region, there are 3 regions which are identified. 1, inaccessible areas, B, administrative areas, and 3, protected areas. Now, inaccessible areas, nobody goes there. In administrative areas, political agent works, and in protected in protected areas, political agents work, and in administered area, political agents appoint maliks. After the attack or post 2001, when the global war on terror began, the political agents and the maliks have been replaced by mullahs actually. Now, this is what Pakistan did. Pakistan's role in this entire resurgence is, one is, on the one hand, the Musharraf banned 5 jihadi groups, the and soon after 9/11, this happened when reassignment or resignation of Pakistan's intelligence chief took place, pro-Parliament military commanders and 2 top generals and many others were shifted around. On the other hand, what they did was they hunted Al-Qaeda but protected the neo-Taliban, saying that they are actually they are following the Pashtunwali or Melmastia code, tribal code, which again